spend more time with our youth. Last thing I'll say about this, you go to downtown or uptown, one of the largest buildings in Mecklenburg County is the Mecklenburg County Jail. It's a huge facility. We spend a lot of resources in making sure that people commit a crime, they get locked up. We need to focus on what they do prior to being locked up, what they're doing in school, how they're doing in school, and just invest in our young people again. If we can build a jail, which is one of the biggest buildings in uptown Charlotte, we have all these federal prisons and all these other facilities, why don't we invest back in our schools? And it's easier, I think, when I used to represent young people, it seems like they could get a Glock 9mm gun faster than they could get a textbook. So I don't know how we got away from that, but I think that's what we need to focus on.
I remember years ago talking to the sheriff when I chaired the school board. I would ask the sheriff, talk to me about the young folk that are over there inside of your jail. And he shared a fact with me that stayed with me even to this day. He said the average reading level was third to fourth grade. The average reading level of the folk that were in juvenile was third or fourth grade. The question talks about social programs. There's no question about the role that substance abuse has played. The best example I can give you today is in the 80s, and I'm going back because I'm old, but in the 80s, crack cocaine, lock them up. In the 2000s, it's opioids. That's a health issue. So a lot of the social programs are not funded to the level that they should be. The services that ought to be in the community, but it's never been that way. So our churches, our community groups, and others have sort of picked up back in the day. We need to bring some of that back in terms of programs and stop waiting necessarily for other people to do it. Let's pick up the mantle and start addressing some of those things and make our young people visible again. They're invisible today. And because they're invisible, they don't have access to formal or informal social programs that build men, as Frederick Douglass says, easier to build young boys than to fix broken men. So we really have to focus on coming together as a community, black, white, rich, old, or poor, and start seeing our young people again. And each one reach one. Reach out to these young folk. And if the programs don't exist, because they ought to be out there for everyone, then create your own one-person program by reaching out to young folk. And I'll say this other piece too, with respect to social programs, there's an overlay of racism, institutional racism, that we also have to address as grown-ups and as taxpayers and voters to make sure that whatever systems that are out there, those systems are fair and that those systems are being distributed in an equitable manner based on the needs of the citizens and communities. Thank you.
Just to clarify a little bit, that question was just for Judge Davis and Commissioner Griffin. This next question is for Commissioner Griffin as well, and Greg. What has been your personal or professional experience with the criminal justice of the social problems?
Also back in the 80s, I used to volunteer helping a friend work with keeping teenagers out of jail, or keep reducing the incarceration time. They had already had an interaction with the criminal justice system. The goal, though, was trying to reduce their time being incarcerated in that facility that the judge just spoke about. And one of the just phenomenal situation to tell you the goodness in our young folk. These kids lived in Fairview Homes, which is public housing. It used to be a public housing project. And they'd read the local newspapers, the warn ads, and they'd see a lost dog, lost cat, $50 reward, $100 reward. They would get on the phone, call the owner of the lost pet, indicate that they found the lost pet. If you meet me on the corner of Earl Street and Oaklawn, I'll return your lost pet. The owners would come out to Oaklawn and Earl Street, make a transaction, give the kid the money, and the kid would disappear back into the project somewhere. The police caught on to that with their detectives and set some kids up, and that's how they got caught and in the criminal justice system. Now, why do I tell that story? Now, these kids were smart. They had dropped out of school, but they were smart enough to get a local newspaper, to read the local newspaper, to understand how to respond to that by reaching out to folks. This is a situation where the youngsters, because of their environment, didn't have the kind of opportunity for formal or informal. We didn't grab those kids early enough, and as a result, we ended up working with them after they got into trouble. So that's one personal experience. The other personal experience is really personal. I know my wife would kill me for telling you all this. But my son, when he was probably, I don't know, 12 years old, 13 years old, we lived off Carmel Road at the time. And his little friend, little white friend, lived just around the corner, had stole his mom's car and called my son, come on, let's go for a joyride. And we got a phone call from the police department. And the police officer said, you Mr. Griffin? Yes, I have your son. I said, what do you mean you have my son? We're on the corner, which was a block away from our house, but you need to come and pick him up. Now, if we didn't live where we lived, and there was a black young man, and the situation was a stolen car, although it was the kid who owned it, my son would be locked up. So that because he was with these white kids, he wasn't locked up. So those are some personal experiences, not only in terms of what we can do working with individuals, but also what we need to do to advocate for fairness in the criminal justice system as it relates to black defendants and white defendants. Economics. When the young man spoke about economics, having a great lawyer, but you have to pay for having a great lawyer when you go into the criminal justice system and stand in front of the courts. Those are some personal experiences. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've been blessed not to be like criminal or been locked up, but I have had like a cousin that had been locked up, falsely accused of something he didn't do, and then it came out they had to let him out because he didn't do it and it was somebody else that did it. And that shows you we still have to look at the system, still have to go through still like cops or like lawyers or judges, they still have to investigate, they still have to, it still go all back to doing your research, still investigate, trying to see who actually did it, and not just going by that person or their race or if they're male or female or their gender or anything like that. It still goes all back to making sure you get the right person who did it or who didn't do it, and not just put somebody in there for that place. You have to do your research. You have to make sure you got all your information right and dot your T's and dot your I's.
All right, this next question is for Judge Davis and Alex. What do you see is the root cause of the criminalization of social problems?
The root cause, racism. Simple, but But I think there's a combination. Systemic racism, for sure. But I think there's a social economic factor at play as well. And when you combine the two, I think you're going to see a lot of criminalization. What I mean by that is if say you take a kid who grew up with low income poverty, and he doesn't see a whole lot of options for himself. And so he does things, criminal activity, sell drugs, break and entering, or whatever. And he's arrested, put in jail. What happens to him is what's supposed to happen. But I don't think people really look at, well, why was selling drugs something he chose to do? Why was the breaking and entering something he chose to do? And when you focus on the why, you start to kind of really see it's more systemic. Because we will judge and demonize him for his decisions, but not look at the fact that he didn't have a whole lot of resources to say, hey, you can be this, and here's how. He wasn't given a whole lot of, maybe not shown a whole lot of options. Maybe he wasn't even given a pathway, because one thing to tell a kid, hey, you can be whatever you want to be. It's another thing to show him. And if a kid's never shown a pathway, you're kind of making him like, well, figure it out for yourself, but you can be that. And also representation matters. If you're telling him you can be something, he's never seen any black man do that in his life, then how's he going to imagine it for himself? And so you start seeing those factors, and then he makes decisions on options that he don't have. And then we demonize him for it. As opposed to say, okay, I see why you made those decisions. Now here's where we need to help you. We need to give you the resources that you don't have. We need to give you access to opportunities to where you can at least see your true potential. To where you can at least see what you're capable of doing. Because everybody has a gift. Everybody has some kind of innate skill, right? And the Bible says, and I might butcher the text, Proverbs 18:16, that a man's gift make room for him and will bring him in room with great men, paraphrasing. But understand that the word gift is not the gift you have, it's the gift you give. Meaning the gift that you offer, the gift that you use will make room for you. But you have to have an opportunity to use your gift. And if you don't have that opportunity, if a kid or an adult, if they're never given that opportunity to really use their gift, then one, that gift never becomes fulfillment, and they'll start seeing options that are less than their true potential as their only options. And then we'll judge them on that. And then they'll be criminalized on that. And there's laws saying, well, he did this, that's what's supposed to happen. And we'll never look at the root cause of the why. So I think, one, this racism, but I think the social economic part of it, you kind of have to dig into that and really start addressing those one by one. The systemic racism part, that's layered. That's been in existence since this country was in existence. Same with social economics. But again, what you say, just because you're poor doesn't mean you have to stay poor? Yeah, absolutely. Same thing. I mean, just because that's how you start out doesn't mean that's how you have to stay. And I think that's what the work is for us now, is not just looking at the decisions that a person makes and judging them on their decisions, but fixing their why, so they don't have to stay there.
Thank you. I think the root cause really stems from, you have a person who has a substance abuse problem or mental health issue or poverty issue. I think that those people are easy targets. We have a former elected official who is currently in indictment, and you have people that will actually rally to his behalf. I mean, they will hold protests, they will rally and they support him. And I think, he's a rich man in this country. And you look at someone who's poor, you look at someone who has a mental health issue, no one really cares about them. They're very easy targets. And the majority of the crime of people that I represent when I was a criminal defense attorney, and when I see in court every day, are misdemeanor crimes. You have someone who literally is homeless and will go to a Target store and steal 3 bags of t-shirts, some underwear, some socks. They'll get locked up, they'll be held on a bond, and those are not really issues. Had they had the money, but for not having the money, they probably would have done that. A lot of repeat offenders you see will literally go back to the same bus depot that's located in downtown Charlotte. They'll go back there every day because they want to get out of the rain, they want to get out of the cold, they want to have some shelter over there. And, they're just easy targets. And I think that's why, that's the root cause of the criminalization of social problems, because they're easy targets. There's a certain stigma attached with being or having mental health problems, substance abuse problems, and poor. There was always saying, I heard someone say one time, the poor don't even like the poor. So what happens is you have people who are in a certain socioeconomic status. They may have certain mental health issues or substance abuse problems. No one, for lack of a better term, really gives a damn about that. And they don't have the resources sometimes to have the jobs to be in a position to hire an attorney, or they have crimes that they commit, and you know that happens. You see that in white-collar crimes. They're not, in my opinion, they're not prosecuted as aggressively, and sometimes the punishment, you have someone who can be honestly more harshly punished for being in possession of a stolen motor vehicle than someone who might embezzle or take maybe $100,000. Their charge might get reduced down to a felony charge for which they qualify for probation. So you can have 2 people, a person who steals a car, breaks into a car, or a person who embezzles $100,000, and in the end, they might get the same type of punishment. So I think people are unfairly judged when they come into the system. I think that is the root cause of it. It kind of goes back to what do you want to see, what can you tolerate? And sometimes when you look at who the defendants are in cases, in criminal cases, sometimes there's even disparities sometimes in how they're treated. When I was a criminal defense attorney, we had a judge who's a superior court judge. I won't say who she is, but there will be times when you might have a particular defendant who was charged with a particular crime, and the district attorney offered that person a different plea. One plea might be to a probationary sentence, one plea might be to an active sentence. And, our judges, this particular judge would call the DA out and say, well, hey, look, this person is charged with this crime, this person is charged with this crime, this person was offered the opportunity to have probation, this person is getting an active sentence. Can you explain what the difference is? Well, the difference is that perhaps, and I'm not saying this is always the case, perhaps that person was connected, perhaps they knew someone, and perhaps the other person didn't. So I think the root cause of criminalization of community social problems are, again, poverty issues, mental health issues, substance abuse issues, and this, people not, for lack of a better term, really not giving a damn about the people who are charged, because they fall in those categories: substance abuse issues, mental health issues, or a poverty issue. And I think that's the root cause of it. It's easier to treat them more harshly than it is to perhaps treat white-collar criminals who have money. And I think that's what the root cause of that criminalization of social problems exists.
Thank you. This next question is for Alex and Greg. Tallahassee, I'm going to master the name. Tallahassee says, we must have a long-term commitment to justice if we want to see change. Is he right? How do you feel about that? Start with you, Greg.
I would say yes, he's right, because to get where we want to go, we have to come together as one, and we have to, get our voices out there. We have to vote. We have to like you said, you got people out there that's protesting. We have to get our voices out there, and we got to be heard. If you want justice, you want peace, you want everything to be all right, we all have to come together.
Yeah, I would agree. Definitely there needs to be a long-term commitment to justice. Because, I mean, the injustice didn't happen overnight, right? And you kind of look at where we are in 2023, there's generational layers of injustice in different sectors of life. So in healthcare, in the political system, in the criminal justice system. And so to unravel that, it's going to take time. If you kind of look at just historically, kind of go back to 1865 to now. So when the last enslaved Americans were free, and there was a law, right, that said it's free. Well, as we began to explore our freedom, gain our freedom, grow and thrive, the law changed. Okay, so we had to adapt to that. And every time we began to thrive, laws changed. And we would adapt to that. We had to go through, so you had, into slavery, laws changed. Reconstruction, we thrived, then the law changed. We had the whole Jim Crow leading up to civil rights. We made strides in civil rights. The law changed. You kind of post-civil rights, where it was kind of like, hey, we're good now. No, because then they came up with something called the law on drugs, which was the law on us, because the law was aimed directly at our communities. The law changed. So that shows you the kind of commitment that we need to have, because if they have a commitment to changing the law, to every time we make strides in our communities, just as a people, then we got to consistently be on the front line. In addition to our marches and our protests, we need to be in courtrooms. We need to be in our local politics, particularly our local politics, because that's where they're getting us. It's not just what's going on in the White House, it's what's going on in our cities and our counties. And we have to be consistently there. As we educate our children, I think learning the local laws should be a curriculum. It's one thing to learn the Declaration of Independence in 1776, but I need to know, what can the police do to me if I get pulled over in Charlotte-Mecklenburg County? What legally can they do, and what can't they do? And where can I find that information? Well, why not teach it? If I got to take a civics class, let that be part of the civics education. So yeah, we have to be consistent. And again, this thing didn't just happen overnight, and there's layers. It can get complicated. And we just have to stay adamant about our work ethic.
Thank you. This next question is for Judge Davis. What, if anything, is happening in the criminal justice system to change how Black people are treated in the system? Are you satisfied with these changes? What more can be done within our system?
Thank you, CJ. I can tell you this from my experience, 20 years as a criminal defense attorney. When I first moved to Charlotte, I was really intimidated to go to federal court, because it appeared that everyone that I represented in federal court was really looking at no less than 10 years. That's generally still the case. Usually, most times you're looking at a 5-year sentence, a 10-year sentence. And if there are certain enhancements, you could be looking at a sentence that could be 25 years, 30 years, very easily. But over the past 20 years, there have been certain reforms that have come through state courts and the federal court system. I think people remember back in the 1980s and 90s, they passed what they used to have is a disparity with the crack cocaine versus cocaine disparity. And that was a big issue. I really didn't understand it at the time. I wasn't even a lawyer at the time. I think I was living in Washington, D.C. And I would see people like Jesse Jackson and everyone saying, this is not fair, this is not fair. And what it actually was if you were arrested at one point and you had what is crack cocaine or cocaine base, they call it in federal court, you would get 100, the punishment was pretty much 100 times more severe than if you had powder cocaine. And what that did is that disproportionately affected African Americans because, as we all know, crack cocaine was a very inexpensive alternative to powder cocaine, so it was used widely in the black community and in neighborhoods of extreme poverty. But when people got caught, they were looking at a lot more time for essentially the same substance. And what people said is there was more violence associated with it. It was a stronger drug. It was more addictive, and there were other social evils. But I don't think that ever played out in time. So recently, over the past 10 to 15 years, they've come with a reduction in the crack cocaine versus powder cocaine disparity. And that has actually helped in having a lot of people reduce prison sentences, and they've actually been released from prison. And there have been other reforms too. There used to be in federal court very harsh penalties for being a career offender. Through the First Step Act and other legislation, some of it was actually passed in the Obama administration. Those long 25, 30-year sentences based on your prior criminal history have also been reduced. And on a state level, we actually had some sentencing reform in a way, and the way that I've seen that most, the biggest impact is primarily on probation violations. When I first started, you could be on probation and you could be facing, I'm just making this up, a 3-year prison sentence if you violated probation. And I swear, 15 years ago, 17 years ago, if you tested positive for marijuana, the probation office would have the ability to send you to prison for 3 years just for testing positive for marijuana. So at the state level, we have changed that through the Justice Reinvestment Act now, and you almost have to abscond probation or turn your back on probation or commit a new crime in order to have your probation revoked. And those are some of the changes that are happening on the state level, on the federal level, and they have benefited African Americans tremendously. What I would say, and everyone else has said, also goes back to voting. Depends on who your political leaders are. We are fortunate in Mecklenburg County. I remember when I first started, and I'll tell you, I would go to federal court, I'd literally be shaking because I was going to stand beside somebody who might get 25, 30 years or the rest of their life in prison. Over the past 20 years, Mecklenburg County has really changed a lot. And I don't know if you know it or not, but we have, as you know, we have a black district attorney. We have a black Superior Court, senior president Superior Court judge. We have a black sheriff. Almost all the positions here in Mecklenburg County are occupied by African Americans. And that's different. That's different. And I think what we need to do is we need to continue to lobby our leaders, our community leaders, our politicians, your congressmen, your representatives, anyone you can, because it makes a difference who sometimes you go in front of. Not saying that anyone's going to just give the courthouse away and let the defendants go wild and do anything they need to do, but that really makes a difference. So in summary, I would say the changes that have been made are the things that I spoke of earlier. I am somewhat satisfied with the changes. More can be done, but at the same time, there is a perception sometimes that we are sentenced a little more harshly than we should be. But I think our judges that we have, most of them, I said most of them, treat the defendants fairly when they come through and they give them a fair shake. And we have to realize sometimes that although there may be a lot of disparities, there are some people that just come to the court system that need severe punishment, and that's just a matter of fact. So what more can be done to change? What more can be done within the system? I would say it's on the citizens. You need to hold your judges accountable. You need to hold your sheriff accountable. You need to, as I said earlier, if you want to see some change, you need to go out and vote. and you need to get involved. You need to maybe come down to the courthouse one day and just observe court. So let me sit down and see what's going on down here. Let me see how the brothers are getting treated down here. Let me see what's happening. And then that's the only way we're going to really have any other changes going to go on. It makes a huge difference. I'll tell you why I just go to federal court, because we had scared to go to federal court. Actually, we had a prosecutor who was very aggressive 20 years ago. Now, again, we have, through the efforts of our leaders here in Mecklenburg County, on the state, national, and local level, we have, for the first time that I ever know of, we had a Black United States Attorney for the Western District of North Carolina, African-American woman. And that's a huge accomplishment. Now, I think the next thing we need to do is we need to take those same people who lobbied for her to get that position, try to get us a federal district court judge. And I could be mistaken. I don't think there's ever, and I'm pretty certain that there's never been a Black federal judge in the Western District of North Carolina at all. And Charlotte is the biggest city in the state of North Carolina. It's the biggest city in the Western District of North Carolina. Has the highest population of any city in the Western District of North Carolina, but we've never had a Black federal district court judge. So I think those are the things you need to look at. Those are the things you need to do. And I think that's all I can say on that question. Thank you.
All right, my last question before we open the floor to our audience is for Commissioner Griffin, Greg, and Alex. What can be done by the schools, the Black community, the faith community, particularly Black churches, to change Black people, the way Black people are seen and treated in the criminal justice system?
When the judge talked about the U.S. attorney, I kind of smiled because I signed her high school diploma in 1999. She graduated from South Mecklenburg High School. But education is just so important to me. I grew up a single parent household here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Was on food stamps before food stamps. It was called commodity food. You'd go get brown bags of food from the Department of Social Services. When it was right behind the federal courts on 4th Street was the Department of Social Services growing up. But one thing was central in my experience, and that is, notwithstanding the fact that we were economically poor, education was so important. And everybody around me, not only my father, who couldn't read or write, had to sign his name for him, there was always get your education because they can't take that from you. People in my community, Miss Petal, I'll never forget her. The first time I ran for school board in '85, she was on a forum like this, and she said, "Yep, I support him, but he used to jump my fence and steal my pears." I wasn't the best kid in the world growing up here in Charlotte, North Carolina. But there was a family around me in terms of engaging me. When I would not want to do what was right, someone said something to me. And that's what I meant earlier about making our kids invisible. Right now they're invisible. They get away moving, doing things, and no one says anything to them. Say something to them. Okay? Reach out to them. But education is absolutely critical because it gives you a sense of self-worth. It gives you a sense that I have some choices. I don't have to pick this up. I don't have to take this. I can find another approach to obtain whatever it is I'm looking for. We have to challenge, and challenge me. I'm an elected official. I'm a county commissioner at large. So challenge me, but challenge our education system to make sure that our youngsters are learning and learning appropriately in order that they have choices growing up. They all don't have to go to college, but they certainly can be some type of vocation, whether it's a plumber. If y'all ever figured out what plumbers cost today? So skills, knowledge is like being rich. And we have to make sure that our youngsters walk with their heads up because they have the knowledge and skills to have those choices. So education is so critically important. And I just can't say enough. I think we often mention education one way or another, but it is so critically important for the survival of the African American community in our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
As far as the faith community, the church, the Black church in particular, I think Black churches could begin to see themselves more than just a institution and resource for Sunday morning. I think Black churches, and there's some that are actually doing this, but I think more need to develop an infrastructure to where it can be an organization that meets the needs of the community that it's in, and the community of the city as a whole, to meet those needs for that are unaddressed, so that the people who do have those unaddressed needs are less susceptible to the criminal justice system. So if you think about it, why does a drug dealer sell drugs? The same reason we get up and go to work every morning, to make money. And if you're a church and you're in the community and there's that activity around you, then there's an opportunity to start doing programs to where you can kind of give that person more options. Again, going back to what I said originally about skills training, the church is in a good position to do that. And the reason I say that is because the Black community still trusts the Black church. Because when all hell breaks loose, they come here. When they have a need, it's not the person they're following on TikTok, on Instagram, they're coming to the pastor. And they're coming for prayer. So there's still a trust that the Black community has here. And I think we can leverage that trust to do more than just pray. Pray and offer resources. Pray and offer help. Preach a sermon and offer training. But I think the reason why a lot of churches, and I'm speaking Black churches as a whole, is because a lot of churches don't have that infrastructure. We're not thinking that we want to do more, but we're not structured to do more. So when we have plans to do more, those plans only go so far. Because what we want to do requires resources that the church doesn't have. So we need to be structured a little bit different, or have an additional structure to what we're already doing, to where we can leverage that to go further, to do those things that are beyond Sunday morning. I was born in '75, so I missed the whole civil rights movement. But when you think about the role the Black church played then, it was more than just Sunday morning. The church was the foundation for a lot of what happened during the time. Meetings were held at the church, a lot of strategy planning, a lot of people came together, a lot of churches funded those movements. And I think we need to get back to doing that, because in 2023, there's still a need, and it's a need that we can meet. But I don't think we can do it if we're still structured the same way we were back during the civil rights movement. It's 2023. And there are churches that are doing it, which means there's a blueprint already out there. And if there can be some kind of mentoring where one church mentors another on, hey, this is what we did and we were successful, this is what you can do. And however long it takes to walk one church through that process, then let it be what it takes, whether it's a year or whatever. But we want to help, but we need to do it right. And we need to offer help that's sustainable. And that becomes with structuring and make sure that we're positioned the right way.
Correct. Really, it starts with being raised at your house by your parents. Getting that teaching, getting that know what to do when you're going to school from your teachers, then coming back, going to the church. Your parents taking you to church, going to Sunday school, getting involved in activities at the church, different events, and then getting the community involved, like around the church, around your schools, around your where you live, getting those people involved, and getting instilled and teach it. And actually, we got to get the youth involved more, because even though youth be on their on their phone or this, but we got to reach out. We got to lean on one another, and we got to make sure we all even though we're getting that training, we forget things, but we all got to come together as a people, come together, a community come together, as a church come together, as a school come together, as the world come together, as a city, and come together so we can have stuff and make sure we plan stuff and come together as a people and come out together at everything that we teach and learn, but we still have to go back and make sure we're doing stuff right, and make sure we look and everything, voting and for as a community together.
So now we have about 5 minutes for questions. Is there anybody that want to ask a question? Yes, sir.
Good evening, everyone. How you doing? My name is Trustee Gibson. I have a question to ask. I understand that it's going to be poor and be successful. I was like individual, like the kind of commission, like so. My father was a butcher, and he had 6 kids to raise, and we all graduated college. But wouldn't you say it's also a class issue of why a lot of black, particularly males, while in prison? I'm speaking about class. Whoever can answer that question, doesn't matter.
So, if I'm understanding your question right, the class as it relates to the men in prison?
No, class as what? I'm talking about economic class.
Right, the social economic class.
Social economic means the poor go to prison, basically what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's a class issue.
Yeah. That's, in my opinion, and I definitely just use that. But yeah, I think there is a strong correlation between the socioeconomic class and what you see in prison. Kind of to the example that Commissioner Griffin gave, where with his son, if you're living off of Carmel Road, you're not living in a low-income community. Right. And so your zip code, for one, probably was one of the reasons why your son was treated differently, and who he was with. Now, had the zip code been 28205, which is where we are, yeah. And I think what happens when you are low income, you have this low income status, I think someone said this up here, it's easier for the system to take advantage of you. Because you don't have the resources to defend yourself. Right. Or I don't want to look as critical, but like here's an example. So in this neighborhood, this neighborhood is policed more than I would say my neighborhood, and I live in Huntersville, North Carolina. So if someone is speeding down the street, there's more a chance of them getting a ticket in this neighborhood than in my neighborhood where they speed all the time. Yeah. But here's the thing. So say someone who's living in this neighborhood, low socioeconomic, they were speeding, they did it, it was on them. They get the tickets. But that ticket is probably now more of a financial hardship, where someone in my neighborhood is just an inconvenience. And so there's a cycle with that, if you will. So the social economic status of a person, I think it makes it more susceptible to the criminal justice system, because again, it's easier for the system to take advantage of them, or it also affects how the system may see them, and therefore they get treated differently. Now that's my opinion of your question.
So you say it's basically more vulnerable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I could tell it too.
I'm a judge.
Yeah. Just briefly, I'll go into that. I'll say this, my father's deceased now, and they had me much later in life. He used to tell me how, when he was growing up, that everybody stayed in the same neighborhood, whoever it was, lawyer, doctor, whoever it was, we all stayed in the same neighborhood. And he would always explain to me that times were different. And I think you have a valid point. The class system now, I think, makes a bigger difference than it did 25, 30, 40 years ago, when there was more segregation and we tended to all live in the same neighborhood. I think we used to, based on what he told me, I mean, it used to be more accountability. I mean, you could have anybody living on your block, anybody living in your neighborhood, and we, as he said, we were all poor, and some of us still poor, but that's one of those things that you have a very valid point. If your father has a high school education or a college education, and then they instill in you certain values, that's no guarantee that you're not going to be involved in the criminal justice system.
Right.
I just agree with you. It is a race thing, it's a class thing, it's a socioeconomic status thing. But I tend to agree with you. If you break it down by class, middle class and upper middle class, people of all races tend to be less likely involved in the criminal justice system. So I'd have to agree with you on your assessment of that. And there's various reasons for that.
Good evening. This question is for Judge Davis. Judge Davis, I would like to know if the laws have changed in North Carolina to try juveniles and incarcerate juveniles in adult prison systems.
Actually, the laws have changed. Just recently, maybe 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, in North Carolina, an adult criminal defendant was considered a person who was 16 years old. If you went out and broke into a car, which is a low-level felony, and you were 16 years old when the crime happened, you would be treated as if you were 35 years old. You get the same punishment that a 35-year-old would be subjected to. About 2 years ago, that law changed. Our juvenile age is now 18. And that makes a huge difference because a lot of when you get a certain age, you're more likely, because of peer pressure and other things, to be involved in crimes. But we had one of the lowest ages for adult criminal defendants until about 2 years ago. The legislature changed that to 18 as opposed to 16. Now there are some exceptions to that. They're kind of technical, but that's been the biggest change in juvenile law in the past few years. The age for juvenile was increased. Oh, I'm sorry, I just said that wrong. The age to be charged as an adult criminal defendant was increased from the age of 16 to the age of 18. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
That's the most recent thing that I've noticed.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I did want to raise an eyebrow, and then I also want to ask a question. The eyebrow that I wanted to raise was, if we really think about it, when it comes to slavery, the only thing that abolished it was a piece of paper that said you can no longer do this. So if you really look at it and think about it, the education behind it, once it was abolished, never happened, and the accountability never took place. Let's end that, and then let's ponder on that on our way home. My question tonight is about the shield. What can we do as citizens of the United States of America when it comes to injustice, when it comes to the shield and the protection behind the shield? Because there's a major disparity with accountability when it comes to police brutality and things of that nature. And then it comes behind the shield that when we want accountability, it's hard to get behind that to get the justice that we're asking for. So what can we do for that?
Okay, I have a thought. And it goes back to goes back to the economy of the thing. So think about this. If a police officer were to, say, do something to me, and abuse of power, abuse of authority, abuse me, beat me, or whatever, chances are he or she would be suspended, probably with pay, pending an investigation. So if he's being suspended with pay, who's paying him? Taxpayers. So say there's an investigation and there's a settlement. Who's paying for the lawyers for the settlement? We are. Say I get paid, and I get paid a lot. Say it's $10 million, and they pay that money out of a fund. Where does the money from the fund come from? Taxpayer. So see where I'm going with this? We're paying for the brutality that happens. And the police officers is not really held accountable. Not financially, at least. Unless there's a loss of a job, then that's where there's a financial accountability. And my understanding, and I could be wrong, but the police department is not really accountable because they set aside money every year for these things. So they already have a budget item for brutality, which means they know it's going to happen. It's a line item on the balance sheet that they have every year. And so there's no real financial accountability. And I think if that changed, you start messing with somebody's pocket, I think they'll police differently. Now how that happens, I don't know. But I saw something on the news a while ago that starting salary for a police officer was $48,000 and some change. Less than $50,000 a year. So if I'm a police officer and I do something and I get fired, it's not difficult to replace a $48,000 annual salary. Even if I got to take a part-time job and work some side hustles, I can still bring that money in and provide for my family. So the only thing I'm losing is a job. But what if you bump that salary up from $40,000 to $65,000? But you say this: if you get found guilty of doing anything wrong, we're going to lower your salary back down to that $48,000. And you can't get a raise for the next 3 years, regardless of what you do, how well you perform, because you're on probation. And then after that, if you're off a probation period, we put your salary back to where it is. So I think, one, if you have a higher salary, maybe one, you have a higher class of people who will be accountable for the job. And if they know that I'm going to lose roughly $15,000 if I do something wrong, I'm going to think twice about doing it wrong. So I don't know how you put that in play. I don't know what kind of red tape that would have to go through, but that's been my thought for a while, that there's no financial accountability to those officers that do that, other than the loss of a job. And it has to get real bad for that to happen based on what we've seen in the media. So somehow layer a financial accountability to that, I think will change some of the policing. Because again, you mess with someone's ability to provide for their family, they're going to think differently about how they do their job. And that's just all of us. So that's my opinion.
Real quickly, you talked about the institutional shield. You, me, we represent the shield. The laws of North Carolina, the policies here in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, are created by people like you and me. If you want to change it, you're looking at the answer in the mirror. It's us. We have to be more engaged to make a difference. The last election, Mecklenburg County African American community, and the majority community, but the African American community had the smallest participation of any county in North Carolina. So look in the mirror. We can make a change.
I just want to add one thing, really briefly about question that you asked. I think, I know what the topic is tonight. Sometimes you need to know what game you're playing, and you need to know in advance what you face, and you need to take a good self-evaluation. A lot of people, what they're doing and what their behaviors are, because ultimately that's what the police are going to do. If you're out and they have a reason to stop you, they have a reason to arrest you, that's just exactly what they're going to do. So knowing that, you need to prepare yourself. If you have a police encounter, you need to prepare your children if they have a police encounter. And sometimes people are committing crimes. Let's get that right. But I think how we address the issue or how we pre-plan for that makes a big difference. And I think we need to hold ourselves accountable sometimes for our actions. And if you are going to have a police encounter or something, or if you think that's going to happen, you need to have a game plan. You need to be prepared to break yourself, for lack of a better term. Be polite and cooperative, because they have a lot of power on the streets. They are licensed to carry guns. And sometimes we have to recognize the situation we're in and know the game we were playing, because that's just a fact of life. And I think we need to address it that way. Just know the game you're playing, know what you're dealing with. Know that not all police officers are bad cops. Very few of them are bad cops. So you just need to know how you conduct yourself in public. Makes a huge difference. And if you have a police encounter, it's, for the most part, it's a situation you can't win. You should be compliant and wait for your day in court. Don't say anything to the police. Don't agitate the police. You feel you have a grievance, contact internal affairs. Contact the police department. There are ways to deal with that and put pressure on them instead of doing it on the streets. Because if you confront an officer on the street 9 times out of 10, you're gonna be on a short end of the stick. That's my only comment as far as that goes.
And just to piggyback off of Judge Davis, it's like I said, it still start with our young people, getting the teaching, getting the learning they from adults or their mentor or anybody, because it's like I said, start with our young people, and they go out in the world, they be on the street, they be on the corner, they be in school, they be outside of school, they by themselves or be with their friends. Like I said, they just still got to get that training and know what kind of situation they in when they do come against a cop or, get stopped by a cop or whatever they sitting in their car or anything or videos or, posting and stuff. So, like I said, just start with our young people.
All right, so we have our last 3 questions right here. If we don't get to you for questions, we will be in the back in the fellowship hall for refreshments also. You will also have a chance to talk to the panelists. And I do ask that the responses be 30 seconds or less, just because we're over time.
Well, my question is, I had a little story behind it. I used to deliver to some projects in Nashville, and there was a boy there. He used to jailbreak like scooters off his cell phone, super smart. And he would get remote control cars and turn the gas remote, super smart. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, people at MIT can't do this. We don't do that around here. We don't go to college. He was already broken at like 15. Like, how do you change that? There's nothing. I was taking them pamphlets for TSU, Vanderbilt, Belmont. He was broken. Nothing I could say to him. A month later, he locked up. Smartest kid I ever seen. How do you fix that?
You fix it with love and engagement. Somebody needs to be committed to walk with that young man wherever he's going to go. That's easily said than done, but that's how you fix it. As I said to you earlier, fixing a broken man, it's a lot easier to work with these kids as they're younger, but you're going to have to make each one reach one. And it's enough of us in here that we can partner with a child somewhere to make a difference.
I know if he wasn't in the project, it would go to that. And real quick, CJ, I know you said 30 seconds, but I just want to second what he said, because I've actually spent time with young men just like that. And I've seen when you are consistently loving on that kid, how it changes them. Like, I've witnessed it to the point where you're looking at a miracle that only God can work, and He worked through you. But I would say, if you noticed that, you noticed it for a reason. And so, follow whatever that reason may be. Regardless of what, if you think you can make a difference or not, you kind of don't know until you try. I work with kids, I minister with kids. My training is in business administration and finance, not kids. But because I've tried, I've made an impact. So I would definitely second what was said, and just continuously show up. Because, and this is the preacher in me speaking, God showed you that for a reason. And I think it's kind of on you now to figure, okay, God, what you want me to do with this? And then let Him lead you.
I had a similar question. Mine was overall with all the external factors, with media, systematic racism that try to keep us down. How do you try to keep broken men or racism from affecting or influencing or persuading our youth into getting into criminal activities? So kind of similar with the last question, but.
Again, almost the same answer. You have to engage, and that's what I do now. I don't, I've never stopped engaging with some of the young people, and I'll continue to do it. My bandwidth is a lot smaller than it used to be, but that little bit of bandwidth I have, I try to use it to engage youngsters.
And I'd say the kids model what they see. And so if you can broaden what they see, I think that'll make a difference. Like, there's a reason why a young kid wants to be a basketball player, that was modeled for him. There's a reason why a young kid wants to be a rapper, that was modeled for him. And if you can expand that, then you'd be surprised. I met a kid one time, I asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. And I was expecting him to say football player, basketball player. Because I was prepared to spend the next 30 minutes trying to convince him why he needs to plan B. Not to discourage him, but in case that don't work out. And to my surprise, he said, I want to be a social worker. Because he was exposed to a social worker. He had problems in the house. Social worker came in, changed his life, and changed his mindset. And so I think it goes to what they're exposed to is what they'll model. If their exposure is limited, then what they're going to model them. But if you can expose them more to what they see on social media, the criminal justice system, racism, or whatever, expose them more than just entertainment, then one, you've got to give them something more that they can shoot for. Again, your gifts will make room for you. The giving of your gifts. Give them something to give us gifts to.
And if you can't do it, find that resource for that youngster. I don't know which of the healthcare programs some of the people are signed up for, but many of the Medicaid managed care programs in North Carolina provides $150 a year for kids to sign up for Boys and Girls Clubs or something else. They're trying to get after obesity, but you can use that for something else. So that's where knowledge of these programs come from, to talking to people to find it. But there is a capacity for help somewhere. We just have to look for it as grown-ups.
Thank you. Our last question.
Good evening. You've touched on pretty much on what we could do individually, one-on-one, engaging in resources, that kind of thing. But my question is more as to how can we, one church may not have the resources to develop a facility or to help those youth. But we can try to reach those youth, particularly the young black males, before they get in the system. How can we partner maybe with community centers come together as churches and organizations. There's the Exodus Foundation, that's a great organization if you're familiar with them. Where do we go from now? We receive information, we digest it, we can do things one-on-one lobbying, go to the courts and sit in, write our legislators, that kind of thing. But collectively, how can we take this further and not just leave with this information now and go further? You know, any suggestions on, you know, let's get more engaged collectively. Any?
Yeah, I would say as a church, so for instance, there's an elementary school right down here. We can start there. If you're going to get to them early, that's the age. I think once you pass a certain grade level, then, yeah, then not that you can't make a difference, but when they're young, again, they're sponges. And again, you're modeling for them. And you're really showing them what they can be. But the thing is, with kids, you can't just show up once or twice.
Right.
You have to be consistent. And so I would say start with the elementary schools. And say, hey, how can we as a church or as a community group, how can we partner with you? What can we do to help with your kids? And that will go a long way with the impact you have on that child's life. Because children spell love T-I-M-E. It's the time you spend with them. And one thing I know about kids is they don't know how to say thank you in the moment, because it's kind of weird. But they'll show you their thanks. And so you'll know if you're consistent that it won't be for nothing. But I would definitely say start at that elementary age and partner with the schools. And I think schools like the one here in this community would love to have a whole church show up to say, hey, how can we help you? And just go from there.
Yeah, there are probably 100 buildings that close at 5 o'clock and sometimes not open on weekends. They're called school buildings and county buildings. If they're grown-ups, churches want to partner with some of these schools, as he's indicated, other buildings. Start a club, start basketball games, start any kind of relationship with kids. If you don't have the church facility to do it, get your local schools or county buildings to open their doors.
I want to give a special thank you to our panelists. Before we transition to the fellowship hall for refreshments, and also extend the conversation if you want to, I do want to give a couple announcements. Temple Beth Yale is also having their criminal justice series Wednesday, April 19th. And Friendship Missionary Baptist Church is also having their criminal justice series Tuesday, April 25th. And both of those times is at, I'm sorry. Temple Beth Yale time is at 6 and Friendship is at 6:30. With that being said, we can go ahead and head to the fellowship hall. Thank you.